Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new tutorial series dedicated to user interfaces and control nodes within the Godot engine. It's going to be very similar to the first-person shooter tutorial series that's already on my channel and ongoing. So if you're familiar with that, it's a very similar setup. We're going to be doing things step by step. We're going to start very basic and try to move through all of the different aspects of the control node user interface system, like themes, different UI setups like menus, settings, heads-up displays. We'll try to touch on as much as possible and just kind of learn together about how all of these things work and what you can actually do with control nodes and user interfaces within the Godot engine. Today, we're going to be focusing on just a very basic main menu setup. It's going to be sort of a crash course. We're going to try to touch on little bits of everything, familiarize ourselves with the control node system so we have a solid foundation to start making some really cool stuff later on. For this video and any videos going forward, I'm going to be working from Godot 4.3. I'm on the Dev 6 version of that, and we'll probably update to stable once that's released. I have a completely empty project, but you can work from your own if that's what you're doing, or you can start a new one. That works too. And if you'd like to grab the source files for this video or any future videos in the series, you can grab those on my Patreon. All right, let's get started. The first thing we need to do is create a new scene that's going to be for our main menu. And we're going to be using not the user interface root node, because that's just a control node. We'll get into that in a little bit. We're going to click on this other node button, and let's take a look at the different control nodes that we have available to us. Now, typically when you're organizing your control nodes, your user interfaces, you're going to be using container nodes. Now, each one of these containers has a specific use case. And in our case, we're trying to recreate this menu that's in the center of our screen, a very basic main menu style. To do that, we're going to use this center container node. Now, what this does is it takes anything that's a child and it centers it within whatever the size of this container is. So let's use that as our parent. The first thing we need to do is, obviously this is not very big. We need this to stretch across the entirety of our screen. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll notice our control class options over here. Now, these are going to be available for every control node that you use, and we're going to be looking at layout. Now, in layout, there's a lot of different options. The one we're going to be focusing on right now is this anchors preset. What this anchor does is it stretches the box according to where you want your anchors to be. Now, you can anchor it to the top left to the bottom right, or top left to the lower right. For example, if I wanted to do just the left side of the screen, I could do left wide, and you'll notice that it's stretched now to the left side of that viewport. We want this to stretch the entirety of the viewport, and we can use what is called the full rect option. Now that has stretched it to the size of our screen, and now if I were to create a child within this node, it's going to make it right there in the center. In fact, let's go ahead and do that so you can see how that works. Let's take what is called a label node, which is just a plain text node. Add that as a child, and I'm at the center. You'll notice that this is centered again right in the middle of that screen. Now, we're not going to use the label node as a child. What we're going to do is grab another container called a panel container. So this is another container, but it uses a style box, what's called the style box, to create a panel. Now, you can't see the panel yet because we don't have anything inside. So let's go ahead and add our label again. And we zoom in, you can see we've got a panel now that's containing our label node. The next thing we need is another container type called a VBox container. Now, what this container does is it arranges its children vertically. It's going to stack them, so one after another. Now, at this point, we can start adding some children to this VBox container and fill out our menu. The first thing I want is a title, so I'm going to use a label. Now, a label node has a text box up here in the inspector that we can add in some text. We'll type in main menu. Next, we're going to add some buttons. Again, these nodes have a very specific use case, and I think part of the issue is knowing what to use and when to use it. We're just going to use a very basic button. We'll add that as a child, and like the label node, you can add text to that button, and for our text, let's call this new game. So we have our button, we have our label. It doesn't look very good, but we'll get to that in a second when we talk about some themes. Let's fill this out with a few more buttons. We'll make this one a continue button. And if you want to duplicate that, you can click this node, right click and duplicate, or press Control D. And for this one, let's add this be a settings button. And then our last one can be quit. All right, so we have our title for our menu. We have our 4 buttons. Let's test this out. Let's save our control node. We'll call this main menu. And let's test it. We'll run it. And there's our menu. You'll notice that the size matches that viewport box, and we've got our title and all of our buttons. The buttons are actually operable because the nodes are built that way. We just need to make it look a little bit better. Let's click on our panel container and head over to the right side in the inspector tab. And in our control settings, you'll notice we have this theme option. Now this option is kind of hidden away, but this is where you can control the look of every aspect of your control node. Sometimes people will tell you to look to this theme overrides, and it can be enticing because it kind of gives you what you want right away. My recommendation would be to avoid overrides unless absolutely necessary. Using theme is going to give you a lot more control, and it's going to make things replicable, and you won't have some item that didn't magically change because you used an override. So I would avoid overrides, and I would go for themes. Speaking of themes, let's go ahead and create one. You can click that, you'll click New Theme. And a step that some people kind of forget is when you create a resource like that, you can save it. And if you save it, you can always reload it. Now that I have a theme, what the heck do I do with it, right? You've probably had this, encountered this screen before and had no idea what to do with it. And I admit it's a little bit, it's a little unclear. This is a preview of a good variety of control nodes that and how they look within this theme. We don't want it to look like this, and we want to customize it. So let's start with the panel container. We've got my theme is applied to panel container, and we need to go to this field right here. We're going to add plus, and we're going to add a new type that this theme is going to control. Basically, it means that we're going to make this node have new defaults within this theme. Now, if you don't add this node, it's just going to pull from the default theme, which we don't want. So we'll take the panel container, we'll add that as a type. You'll notice that it's in this dropdown now. You can also go to Manage Items, and you'll see it here on the left side of Types. Open this up a little bit. Or you can go through any of the control nodes or presets and simply import whatever those settings are with the data. This is going to bring a lot of stuff into your theme, so I would kind of do it piece by piece. So we have our panel container. The next part that we want to look at is this stuff over here on the right. You have different tabs here, and within these tabs are the options, the settings that you can adjust within this node type. Now, a lot of these are empty for panel container, except for this style box option. And this style box option is where the panel is getting its visuals, where it's getting its look. So if we want to change that using our theme, we go to the style box tab. Right now we just have panel. In the future there might be other options. So we're going to click the plus button. That's going to create a override here. Well, I shouldn't say override. It's not really an override. It's a new default within this theme. And with that, we can add our own style box flat. And if I do that, you'll notice that we've already changed the look of our panel. Now, this is another thing that you can save. In fact, I would recommend it. And you can have a folder of all of these different UI resources that you can pull from. You don't want to create something and then lose it because you unloaded something or deleted it. That would not be good. So let's go ahead and save this. We'll call this, in fact, let's create a new folder. So let's set up a primary, and now we can make some edits. And this is probably the area that some of you want to get to, but you don't know how to get to, because this is where we can add some padding and adjust some of the look real easily. So in our style box setting, let's go ahead and add some padding because that looks pretty rough. The padding is in content margins. Maybe not the best word choice, but that's where the padding is. So let's add some padding. Let's do 50 pixels on all sides. And we're already getting some spacing there. You can add a border width, which adds a border to your box. You can add a blend, which sort of gradually goes from the background color to the border color, sort of like a bevel effect. You can add a corner radius. Now we have rounded corners. Now the expand margin option is going to sort of bring it outside of its container box, like that, which there's some use cases for that, but for what we're doing, we don't need that. And you can add a shadow, change the color or the alpha of that shadow, or you can offset it to make it a drop-down shadow. And then we have an anti-aliasing option, which generally would be turned on. So I'm going to put some settings in here. Feel free to, make your own look. I'm not going to have a border. For our color, we're going to do something that's sort of a darker gray like that. And I don't want rounded corners. And shadow that's fine. We can keep the shadow. And content margins, that's okay for now. So we've set up our new panel container theme within our custom theme. It's working great. If I added another panel container and used the theme, it would automatically look like that. That's the whole point of themes, right? So let's adjust these buttons next. Let's click on our main button and we'll go down to our layout. Go to our theme. Let's load up the theme that we created and do the same process. We're going to go and add button as a type. Now we've got a whole bunch of new options because button's a different type of node. It has different presets, different things that we can change. We've got some colors that we can adjust, constants that we can adjust, the font size, an icon if we added an icon, and then we have all of these style box options. Base type we'll get to in just a second because it's a really nifty tool. It's not explained super great. Okay, so let's set up a new button style box because I don't like this default color. We're looking at normal, which is the normal state of our button, and let's create a new style box. I want to put your attention to this right here. This is a pin button, and what this is going to do is it's going to make any changes that we do within this normal state and any style box setup that we use is going to make it apply to all of these other states if we make style boxes for them. So we want to pin this because we're going to use this as the sort of default setting for our buttons. Created a new style box, so let's save that because we want to keep that, right? We'll call this button and we'll call this primary. And let's adjust it so we're maybe like a medium gray. And then we need to add some content margins because it's way too tight. We need to breathe a little bit. There are a couple of things that I'd like to change real quick, and that's the overall width of our menu is a little thin. So I'd like to set a default minimum size for that. And then let's get a little bit more space in between our buttons. So for the first thing, we need to go to the panel container node. And let's go ahead and close that theme because we don't need it right now. And in our layout settings, we have this option for custom minimum size. Now I want the minimum size to be a little bit bigger, obviously, than 0. So let's set it to 300, maybe a little bit bigger. 400, there we go. And then the other thing that I wanted to change is the spacing here between these buttons. Now, remember we used this vertical box container. This is taking all the children nodes that we set up and layering them in a vertical fashion. There's an option in these VBox and HBox containers, and it's in this override right here. So let's go ahead and load our theme and add a new type for our VBox container. There we go. And then we have an option here in our constants, and we want to change the amount of separation between our buttons. So let's add that to our theme, and then let's make this bigger. Maybe 10, maybe 20, that looks pretty good. All right, now we've got some more separation in our buttons. All right, our label. It's not looking so hot. So let's go to our label. Let's center this like we've centered the rest of our buttons. So in our label settings, there's a horizontal and vertical alignment. Just like any other text editor, we want to set this to center. And now we've centered it. And let's also make some theme adjustments. So we'll assign our theme, go in here, add a label, and let's adjust the font size. Let's make this bigger, maybe like 30 pixels. Now let's say you wanted to adjust the spacing around this label. Now this is sort of a roundabout way to do this, but this is how you're supposed to do it. So in the label options, there's another style box setting. So we need to add a style box, and it's going to be style box empty. Now empty is different from flat or texture in that there's no background, there's no color, there's none of that, there's no border. It's just padding. Okay, so we have our style box empty and we have our content margins. So let's add to the bottom here and make it a little bit more spacing. There we go. If you've ever done cascading style sheets, feels very similar. We're almost there. There's one other change that I'd like to make, and that's what if I want to have a different color button for my buttons? Currently, all the buttons are using the same style, and we don't want that. So this is where we're going to go back to this base type setting. It's kind of a weird way to set this up, but it does make sense as soon as you do it a couple of times. Now the base type is not available if we're using the base type. We need to create our own type, okay? So if we go into Manage Items and go to Edit Items, you can actually add your own type. So let's say I wanted to add a new game button type. We'll click that, we'll close that, go to our new game button type, and now we can make adjustments, except it doesn't know what our adjustments are. We need to set the base type. Now the base type for our new game button would be a button. If we set that, now we have all of the button options for our new game button type, and we can make those adjustments. The second part to this is you need to assign this custom type to the actual control node. So if I'm in my scene tree over here, I'll click the new game button that I created. And let's go down here to theme variation. Now we don't have them preset. We'd have to set our theme in our settings to do that. But you can type it in. So if I type in new game button and select that as my type variation, then any changes that I make with this is going to show up in my control node. So let's add a new normal. Let's add a new style box flat, and you can see we have a different button type. It is a little bit of a pain to get the settings that you were using into the settings that you want to use. I think a workaround for this is to actually quick load our button primary and then resave this as a different type. So we'll do button secondary. We'll save that. And then let's go back to our button here into our theme. And now we can make adjustments to our secondary button style box. We can make this, say, more of an orangey looking thing, kind of like that. And that's how you make different variations of the same control node. All right, I know that was a lot and it wasn't extremely specific about most of it, but I wanted to touch on just the process of creating a very, very basic user interface and what goes into that and all the things that you can change. Going forward, we're going to be very focused on what we're working on. The first step, I believe, is going to be an animation setup, and then we'll move into different user interface types, setting up settings, saving and loading, continue screens, new games, quitting, and different heads-up displays, as much as we can touch on within user interfaces and see where we go. So thanks for watching. I'm really excited to really dive deep into this user interface stuff, and as always, keep creating. All right, guys, if this tutorial was helpful, consider a like and subscribe to the channel, as we're going to be covering a lot more. Thanks to all of my patrons who keep this series going. You too can get access to the project source files by joining my Patreon. You can download everything there, and you'll also get early access to my videos and sneak peeks at future tutorials. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep creating.